So if you're in an Eitz Chaim, we'll be on page 198. If you're in any Chumash, or any Bible for that matter, we are in Genesis chapter 32, verses 4 through 13. I'll read them in chunks of aliyot, but we'll read 4 through 13. This is the famous parsha where Jacob becomes Israel, where Jacob and Esav come back together, and right before, this is the parsha right before we get into the whole Joseph saga. So it's kind of our last moments within just the Jacob story before Yosef is introduced. We will be reading only the beginning part of it, but if you want to read on, those are things that happen throughout the parsha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esav achiv artza seir sedei Edom vayetzav otam lemor ko tamaru ladoni le'Esav ko amar avdecha Yaakov im Lavan garti ve'acher ad ata vayhi shor v'chamor tzon ve'eved ve'shivcha ve'shlecha le'hagi ladoni Limsochen beinecha. The second aliyah begins at verse 7. Vayashuvu hamalachim el Yaakov lemor banu el achicha el Esav vegam holech likratecha ve'arba meot ish imo vayira Yaakov meod ve'tzer lo vayachatz et ha'am asher ito ואת הצאן ואת הבקר והמגבלים לשני מחנות ויאמר אם יבוא עשיו אל המחנה אחד והיכהו והיה המחנה הנשאר לפלטה. Verse 10. Vayomer Yaakov Elohei Avi Abraham Velohei Avi Yitzchak Adonai Haomer Elai Shuv Le'artzecha U'lemoladecha Ve'etiva Imach Kahatonti. This is a beautiful song written by Yonatan Rizel. Mikol Chasadim U'mikol Ha'emet Asher Asita Et Avadecha כי ומקלי עברתי את הירדן הזה ועתה הייתי לשני מחנות הצילני נא מיד אחי מיד עשיו כי ירא אנוכי אותו פן יבוא והיכני אם על בנים ואתה אמרת היטב היטיב עמך ושמתי את זרעך ככל היום אשר לא יספר מרוב. If you didn't catch that, what I said was that there's a beautiful tune written to Katonti, that verse, well, I don't know what verse it is, verse 11, written by Yonatan Rizel, and if you've never heard it before, you should definitely take a listen. It's very, very, very beautiful. Okay, we will continue with our Minha service with the whispered Amidah. This is always a little bit anticlimactic after reading Torah. But page 223 or page 234a or page 574 for the whispered Amidah. קטנתי מכל החסדים ומכל האמת אשר עשית את עבדך. קטנתי מכל החסדים ומכל האמת אשר עשית את עבדך. Okay, we're just going to stick to that part. קטנתי מכל החסדים ומכל האמת אשר עשית את עבדך. קטנתי מכל החסדים ומכל האמת אשר עשית את עבדך. If you have not finished your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. We will continue with the little paragraph that is done before Kaddish Shalem. I'm sorry that I don't know what page it is in the Siddur Sim Shalom, but in the Lev Shalem, it's on page 230. Aleinu, if you're able to do so and not already doing so, please rise. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'tetfilah yetzer b'shil shelo asana k'givur s'avadar s'aman shil. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Lisa, you want to lead us in Kaddish?
Sure.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Yalmad yivrach yirutei v'amlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayechol Beit Yisrael. B'gala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam l'mei maya.
Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam l'mei maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalel shmei dekudsha brichu. Li'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran bi'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yaseh shalom b'mamav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru Amen.
Amen. I'll turn it over now to Rachel for a little learning.
Thank you, Rabbi Schatz. And quick logistical point, Rabbi Schatz, are you able to lead Mariv after the teaching, just in case things get crazy here?
Happy to.
Sounds good. So as we were hearing in the Torah reading from Rabbi Schatz, this is the portion where we get the name Yisrael, and meaning God wrestlers from this episode we'll look at more closely with Yaakov. And before we dive into the text, I was just curious to hear from people if you think this, this name that became one of the names of the Jewish people, the people of Israel, like, does it resonate for you, the idea that we're supposed to be God wrestlers? I'd just be curious to hear some thoughts about that before we dive in.
That's Gary. I mean, one of the things we always do is we struggle with God. Why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? There's always questioning, and I think that's part of our nature.
Beautiful.
And I think also wrestling is like your tendons and the ligaments and the muscles and the bones, and Judaism is right on earth with all that stuff.
Lovely. Yep.
I've always been struck by the fact that the term we use for our legal process is halacha, as opposed to sof haderech, you've gotten there, you've arrived, right? It implies halacha means to be on the way, or to be walking, to be on a journey. So to me, that implies that it's almost much more about the process, about the struggle, about the gray than necessarily where you end up at the end of the day.
Beautiful. And also, you mentioned walking, which also is an embodied thing, that can also, connect us to our bodies, like we heard about the ligaments and the physicality of like the wrestling too. Right. Beautiful. Like there's a process of being engaged in a dialogue, in a struggle, that's embodied in this name and with halakha, like you mentioned. Lovely. Thank you. Other thoughts out there?
I was just going to say that I really like it because I think that it actually gives us room and opportunity, and maybe even the word is an excuse, to be able to not always say like, yeah, this, of course, like this makes total sense. I love everything about this. And it allows you to struggle with it, and that in our name we're supposed to be doing that, as opposed to looking for reasons that it might be okay. Up front, it's saying this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Great. And I think we'll see in the section of the text that we'll look at how we see that modeled in Yaakov, in the way that he approaches the situation. I'll just add a quick line about this, the idea of being God wrestlers. When I was teaching a class of Hebrew school students that this is what Yisrael meant, one of the, I think it was 8th grade, young women in the class, she goes, "Oh, I'm totally going to go around telling people I'm a wrestler. Do you think that's true or not?" And if they say no, she'll be, it is true. I'm a God wrestler. So I just love that, like, even the teenagers I taught, there was something that they could hold on to for that. All right. So if you have the sheet with you, great, you can follow along. If not, I'll say the general piece of the text that we're reading from is Genesis chapter 32, verses 25 to 30. So even if you don't have the sheet, you can look it up in Chumash, 32 verses 25 to 30. Is there anybody who would like to read that main section from the Genesis story about Yaakov, to give us the context of what we're talking about? This is the scene where he's basically preparing to meet Esav the next day, and he's not really sure what he's going to encounter. He heard that that Esav was preparing for battle. Yaakov had sent basically a gift, a large gift of some flocks to try and appease him, but he's not sure what he's going to encounter, and had been praying to God, saying, like, "Oi, I'm afraid, please save me." And then this is kind of the moment that we find ourselves in at night. So would anybody like to read it for us in English, with Hebrew there to guide you if you'd like?
I'll read. Sure.
Great. Thank you so much.
That same night he arose, and taking his 2 wives, his maidservants, and his 11 children, he crossed the ford of the Yabok. After taking them across the stream, he sent across all his possessions. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human, and have prevailed." Jacob asked, "Pray, tell me."
No, great. You can finish that line, where that's just sort of the section that we're going to focus on.
Jacob asked, "Pray, tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of him there.
Great. Thank you so much. So the piece I want us to eventually get to is basically thinking about the part where Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." To me, that's kind of at the crux of like what he's wrestling with. Like, not only he wrestled, but then he also asked for a blessing. So, but before we get to like who or what he was asking a blessing from, I want to think about like what or who was he wrestling. So when it says Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled with him, in Hebrew, Vayavek ish imo. The commentary is pretty clear that it's not actually a man. So let's look at what the commentators think, who the commentators think Jacob was actually struggling with. So if you have the sheet in front of you, source number 2, this Rashi, is there anyone who can read the Rashi for us? Great. Norm? Yeah. You can unmute yourself. I think you're muted. You're muted still.
I was muted. Now I have to go back to where I have it. Okay. Our rabbis of blessed memory explained that he was Esav's guardian angel.
Okay.
That's from Rashi.
Yes. So this is Rashi. He's kind of summarizing a piece from Midrash and Genesis Rabbah, saying this was the guardian angel of Esau. And would you mind reading the Chizkuni also, since that's nice and short too?
A man wrestled with him, an angel in the form of a person. The angel had come to prevent Yaakov from escaping Esav. Okay,
great. Thank you. So there's some similarity between these pieces. They basically both think it's an angel that's meant to protect Esau in some piece. I see the Chizkuni as adding a slight bit of detail, saying like, what was the angel there for? Was it just to embody Esav so he could, freak Yaakov out, or like what was going on? It seems like Chizkuni is saying it wasn't actually to freak him out. It was to make sure he stayed so that he would still, kind of prepare for the battle with Esav. Any other thoughts or questions that come up for people about these two? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think that explanation from Chizkuni makes a whole lot of sense, because the angel fails, and there was no threat to Esav from Yaakov leaving. So Yaakov is leaving, Esav is going to be left at home with his parents available to him, and no more rivalry, no more rival. The rivalry is there, but the rival is leaving, and frankly, he's going to be gone for a long time. So it just doesn't make sense that his guardian angel would be trying to prevent this from happening.
Right. I kind of agree with you. It's like you would think the guardian angel might actually say, sure, Yaakov, like you don't want to fight him, fine. You gave him that big gift. Sweet. He's happy. Like go do whatever you want. I happen to kind of agree with you on that one. The Rashi one, it's more general. It's just saying he's a guardian angel. So if we could maybe, instead of Chizkuni's added layer, if we just read the Rashi and said, okay, it's Esav's guardian angel, what else might you think the guardian angel was there to do? Just your own thoughts. Marshall, go ahead.
Well, we know that Esav and Yaakov struggled together from the womb. So maybe the guardian angel was there to continue the struggle.
Right. And certainly if we think about it in that way, that's exactly what happened. The guardian angel continued struggling with Yaakov until literally it seemed it wasn't possible. And even then it's like, okay, well, you can't win, but I'm still gonna mess with your hip. So you're gonna have like a permanent mark of this struggle, even though you're gonna win. So, right, I think that fits the nature of their kind of ongoing conflict, at least until this point. So great. You can write your Bible commentary and we'll publish it on Sefaria too.
It's actually on Robert Alter.
Rabbi Schatz?
This isn't answering your question, but going back to the idea of Ish, this is something that I struggle with in many different parshiot, that the rabbis like to comment their way out of the fact that maybe it was just a guy, right? Like when Abraham has 3 anashim visit him, all of the commentators are saying, oh, it was angels. Of course it had to be angels because he needed to feel God's presence. Just let it be a guy. Let him wrestle with a guy. And it can still be that God was in that moment. But the fact that it says Ish and all of these, I don't have this source sheet, unfortunately, in front of me, but even in the Eitz Chaim, all of these commentators are saying it had to be a divine being. It was a force within him. let it be a guy. They would have used another word had it not actually been a guy. And in the last verse that Joanna read, it says, Ki sarit im Elohim ve'im anashim ve'tuchal, right? That it was that he has both struggled with God and with people. So maybe it really was just a guy. Like, why couldn't Jacob be strong enough to just struggle with another person?
Just get into a brawl, and he probably helped him like work out some tension that the nervousness he was feeling for facing Esav. So Rabbi Schatz, in your reading of it, with the line that says you've struggled with divine and man, or God and men, where in Yaakov's life do you see as the struggle with God then, if you would read this as just a guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a different kind of struggle. It's a very fair question, and I had a feeling that you might ask it. It's a fair question. I think that struggle was probably, with Rachel and Leah and having kids, or maybe even later on when Joseph dies and Jacob struggles with that grief. There's also the struggle. It's not a bad struggle. It's the good kind of struggle with the dream that I actually spoke about this morning, right? This idea of what are those angels doing? How am I to now move forward with this divine impact on my life? So I think that there have been other moments of struggle, though not physical struggle.
Right. As is often how we struggle with God. It's right. Often not this physical. Right. So I see Lisa, and then Stevie, and then Marshall.
This is such a lively topic. And it's exciting to me because I remember learning in the Zohar that there's a category of person called an atzmi. So going back to the wrestlers, right? An atzmi is someone who's in touch with their atzamot, with their bones. And they don't have to be Jewish. For example, Yitro, Moshe's teacher, was an atzmi. He was a person who realized his godness, his God beingness through going inside. So I wonder here if the ish he's wrestling is an atzmi, someone who really knew who he was, knew his connection to the earth and to heaven at the same time.
Very nice. Thanks for bringing that connection for us.
Actually is one of the definitions of Yisrael. Yisrael is not just somebody that's Jewish, it's someone that knows their link to the earth and their link to Shemayim at the same time.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Stevie?
No.
Oh, okay. I just, to support what Rabbi Schatz was saying, Sarita Shima Tuchal doesn't necessarily mean struggled against divine beings. It could be struggled on a team along with divine beings, in which case Jacob's life has, plenty of that. Right.
Very nice. And the rabbis are big into reading big differences into small prepositions. Like when we hear that like Hannah prayed like Al Hashem, the rabbis read that as being confrontational. But if this is Im, I think there's plenty room, exactly like you're saying, to read it as being in partnership. And I think that's actually a really beautiful lesson to take from this, that struggle doesn't have to be oppositional. Struggle can be like, God, I'm working through something and I need you to like partner with me in thinking this through, and we're going to struggle together. If anybody knows about Rabbi Artson writes a lot about process theology, that kind of like you and God are walking a path together. And I think anyway, if you catch him, he loves talking about that. So I think that he'd be really into that. Like really looking at that Im. Beautiful. Marshall, you had another thought?
Yes, I just want to do a deliberate misreading of Chizkuni. So we know that the Hebrew letters Kaf or Chaf, let's say Kaf, has the same sound as a Kuf, right? So we take a look here actually in the Hebrew text, Vayavek ish imo malach bidmut ish, and then it says le'akvo. And if one would just hear le'akvo, almost you're hearing the name Yaakov there. So I'm deliberately misreading the text, but I think that's what's happening in the text itself, because our translator here has said the angel has come to prevent Yaakov from escaping Esau. Yaakov's name is not mentioned specifically. There's just the personal pronoun, the him.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I mean, that's midrash in a nutshell. That's exactly how the rabbis read so many things into it. So that's great. So I think to address some of the concerns or questions people raised about, is it a man? Could there be other things? Or like what might be another purpose to this struggle encounter if it's not just, Esav's guardian angel. If we look at what Radak has to say, he still says it's an angel, but he has a slightly different view of the nature of the encounter. So is there anyone who would like to read Radak for us? Marlise, great, thank you.
Okay. A man refers to an angel, and similarly, man is used to refer to an angel in Joshua, and the man means the angel Gabriel in the book of Daniel. They referred to angels who spoke with humans and appeared to them as men. God sent this angel to Yaakov to strengthen his heart so he would not be afraid of Esav. And he struggled with him until the break of dawn. This is an allusion to Yaakov, that there would be light after darkness.
So how, Marlise, you're welcome to, or anyone else, how is this read of the encounter different from what we were describing before?
Well, it seems like it says he's trying to prepare him to help him. It's kind of like that same thing that I guess Stevie was saying about the struggling with him.
Right. It's meant to be a source of support. And the small piece of it that I had cut out in the middle, just so we can all get this on a nice page, was basically saying it was like a preparatory small challenge to say, well, if he could prevail against this, this divine being, then easy peasy, no problem, he could prevail against Esav. So it was kind of meant to bolster his confidence. Norman?
It clearly is getting rid of the concept that this is Esav's guardian angel. He may be an angel, he may be a man, he may be something else altogether, but he's not Esav's guardian angel.
Also, I'll say Professor James Kugel, in his book, The God That Was, I think, talks extensively about angels and concludes that this is sort of the pattern that, right, there's this person that appears and then there's later this revelation that it was actually God, and that sort of whole process is referred to as an angel. And so what Radak is getting at, I think, is actually supported in, numerous biblical texts that, you could write a book. Someone's written a whole book about, right? There's not just a few examples, but
right. And it seems like what you're suggesting is it maybe doesn't have to be a binary between was it a human or was it godly, that like there could have even been perhaps an encounter with a person, but the process of that struggle could have, had divine influence in it. Is that a fair?
Right, it's both. I mean, it's like the person literally is God, but like the recognition of that is,
Delayed.
It's delayed, but is only possible because this person has this spiritual, availability to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Great. And yes, it seems almost more like it's Yaakov's guardian angel in this case than Esav's. Larry?
Sorry. So I'm not so sure that it's necessarily, we have to abandon the idea that it's Esav's guardian angel. So what was it that Yaakov was intending to do? One of the things, he was trying to protect himself and some of his possessions and family from what he thought would be an attack by Esav. In other words, he was thinking absolutely the worst of Esav. And we can possibly see this as a midrash, that Esav's guardian angel is coming to tell him, no, don't flee, because in fact, your brother is ready to reconcile with you. Now, I know this reads against the traditional interpretation of what Esav was really intending to do, but in fact, I admit I'm influenced by the television show Fargo in the 4th season, where there are two brothers, one who actually resembles Esau as we understand him, crude and big and large and thuggish, who in fact wants to reconcile with his brother. And it may well be that it's the angel who is telling him it's time to go and to meet with him. And in fact, isn't that what happens? There's no mention of anything happening other than, I think, Jacob raised his eyes and saw, and look, Esau was coming. So he was convinced, and I think that Jacob is in the back when he's sleeping and having this struggle. So he actually moves to the front at some point of his family and of his flocks. And he's convinced that he needs to go and to allow Esau to reconcile with him, not just to reconcile with Esau, but to reconcile with him. And that may be one way of understanding the angel.
That's beautiful. You're pointing out that guardian angel doesn't have to be a being that's only looking out for the best interest of Esau. It's almost the guardian angel as a mediator or helping in the peacekeeping. That's really beautiful. Thank you. Joanna?
I wanted to sort of connect a little bit, interestingly, to a Dvar Torah that I heard this morning with the Minyan that I davened this morning on the dream that was at the beginning of this week's Parsha, the famous dream of the ladders, where there's in the description of what's taking place in the dream, to read the JPS translation, angels of God were going up and down on it. And everyone typically understands the it to refer to the ladder. And I can't remember if the person who gave the Dvar Torah actually quoted this specific commentary, but referenced a Hasidic commentary that understands Bo not to be a reference to the ladder, but Malachei Elohim Olim V'Yordim Bo, to be within him. Bo could be translated to be within him. So it was his, talking about the wrestling, it was his own internal struggle. And touching on some of the things that have been said here, I wonder if the Atzmi is Yaakov himself, that this is an internal struggle with, let's say his Yetzer, or, trying to work something through. And the other place it takes me to is that we all have a spark of the divine within us. So when we talk about wrestling with a divine being, is there some sense here that God was in essence trying to empower Yaakov to access his own divineness, and in order to be able to overcome what lay ahead for him?
Very nice. Very nice. Lisa?
We can see, I really appreciate what you just said, Joanna. It reminds me of when Melchizedek came to Abraham. And Melchizedek doesn't appear very much in our sources, but if we really look deeply what it is, Melchizedek introduced Abraham to his essence, to his atzmiyut, to his higher self. So any man or woman that introduces us to our higher self will light the spark on that inner ladder, that bow, right? And even the word sulam is like salam, like a sulam is a scale. It's not just a ladder, it's a scale. It also means peace. It means health in Arabic. There's so many references to the word salam, sulam, salem, shalom, shalem. So I second your vision on the bow, meaning inside him.
Very nice. You're all on exactly the thought train I was in connecting this to his prior struggles. But before we go there, Brant, have you been raising a hand?
Always troubled by the trashing of Esau.
And
maybe it's because I'm the son of a child psychiatrist, but I just find this whole story of these two guys, they're twins from the same mother, right? I think they more represent that the future of Judaism is a constant struggle between these two sides of the personality. And whoever wrote these commentaries, I'm reading the Schatzenstein, footnotes, where they go to great lengths to promote Israel at the expense of his brother, who's the evil. And so, and you never know when these comments are written and what type of things they're trying to address. but there seems, and I've said this before, I think there's a constant struggle between the cerebral Jew and the physical Jew. And Esau represents the physical, and Jacob represents the cerebral. And the rabbis who did all this stuff expressed a clear preference for the Torah-studying cerebral Jew. And this story shows you that even the cerebral guy can struggle and get enough strength and be able to deal with the physical. And I just, it really has always bothered me reading about how all of the commentaries go to great lengths to create the evil twin. And I've never been comfortable with it. And I think a better explanation is that it represents different aspects of a single Jew's personality that keeps bearing itself out and constantly struggling the physical against the cerebral. But I know that I'm the only one who holds that view. So
I don't know. I think that's great. And I think you're right that whatever the persecution du jour was, often you'll see in, Rashi was living through the Crusades, that often the quote unquote people traditionally read as bad guys in the Torah get read, whether they state explicitly or not, they consider like Edom is supposed to be Rome, and that Esau is associated with these other like peoples who were creating problems for whatever time they're living in. But I think you're right that there's a even more enduring internal struggle. Other people have mentioned internal struggles, and I think you're totally right. Like, we're still dealing with that now. I think we have a whole lot of work we can do better as a Jewish community in figuring out how to help people connect to their embodied Judaism. And I think you're totally right that there's a lot of that, manifest in this conflict. Norman?
I just wanted to second Brant's motion and point out that Rabbi Clive Lawson frequently takes the position that Asaph has been denigrated, but in fact, what Asaph does is he lives in the moment. He doesn't plan ahead all the time. He's a perfectly decent person, but he lives in the moment. Yaakov was always planning and plotting and deciding, what's going to happen. And in this case, you'll do this, and in that case, you'll do that. Clearly, the rabbis like him, but it's not Asaph's fault. Asaph is just one of those nice people, an ordinary person, lives in the moment, does what feels good right now, doesn't harm anybody particularly, but doesn't really think carefully about what he's doing and what's the future.
So yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot of different, we can look at the many layers of what that, to flesh out that conflict that Brant was trying to bring to our attention. So let's, we've named a lot of the different pieces of what this struggle was, whether it was internal, whether it was, a representative on behalf of Esau, whether it was actually a guy that there was some kind of very embodied struggle that happened with Yaakov, and it left him with a physical impact. It left him with his name. And what I think is remarkable about this story, whoever and whatever that challenge looked like exactly, that not only he said, okay, I'm going to come out of this, I'm going to prevail, I'm also going to have the chutzpah to ask for a blessing. You would think it would have been enough to say, I'm struggling. Okay, phew. Looks like I'm going to win this fight. To say, no, actually, you can't go until you bless me. And to think that that's part of the idea of what it means to be part of Yisrael, that even in the struggles that we're facing, it's not only enough that we're supposed to struggle with God, that Dafka specifically in those moments, we're supposed to ask for a blessing. And people were saying, connecting it to what he may have experienced in this past week's Parsha with the Jacob's Ladder story, I think that experience must have had an impact on him to be able to say, what is it, in this moment that allows me to ask for a blessing? So just to kind of, the one line from that other story that speaks to me here is where he says, he wakes up from the sleep where he had the vision of the ladder and says, surely God was in this place and I didn't know it. How awesome is this place? and I at least the way I read him, I have to think of him as a person who that fundamentally altered his being to be able to say, in any place where I may not think that God is there, I could be wrong. And I have to be looking for where God is in that moment. And so that when he found himself in this place of struggle, whether he knew it was an angel or a divine being or a person, to be able to say, okay, maybe God is also in this place, whether I know it or not. And like, okay, please give me the blessing. So that's how I'm reading how Jacob got out of that, asking for a blessing. Are there any other people who want to share some closing thoughts? Larry and then Lisa.
I'm going to go back to Rabbi Schatz's discussion this morning about Hamakom, and my interjection this morning about the use of the name, the Adonai or the Yud-He Vav-He, which is a name of God or the name of God. And notice in the story this morning about the ladder, Yaakov knows the name of God. He says that Adonai is there. He doesn't say the name of God here. And in fact, he uses the word makom, and read the Hebrew of the ending. V'yikra Yaakov Shem HaMakom Peniel. He calls makom God, or the God place, or whatever we want to take it. He calls it Peniel. He doesn't call it Yud-He Vav-He or any variation of that. He doesn't call it by God's name. I don't know where I'm to go with this, but I'm always struck, as I said this morning, how easily in English we use God, 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 when in fact there are so many different and rich and very differentiated ways of talking about God and God's name. And I really think that we ought not to do that. I think we ought to be very clear. When we're talking about Yud-He Vav-He, we either ought to be using Adonai, which I don't mind using, or Hashem, or the Lord, and not use the word God, because it confuses us.
Where I thought you were going, I know this is not my teaching, but where I thought you were going was that he asks for the person's name at the end of what Rachel's talking about, and yet he knew God's name, which goes back to what I said at the beginning of this teaching, which is maybe it was just a guy, because if you already know Adonai's name, and that's who you might be struggling with, unless, God has some kind of disguise on, you already proved to us that you know who that is. So in this moment, is it someone different, or is it supposed to be manifesting God in a different form?
Right. I think I'm seeing him as somebody who's like now open to being surprised. Sort of like, maybe I think I know who God is. Maybe I think you're different. Maybe you're not. I've been surprised before. I'm open to being surprised again. Totally. Lisa, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed your comments. I think like when something happens and we no longer experience our life the way we used to, and when that spiritual awakening happens, so a few things happen at the same time, right? The presence of God comes upon you, and you don't know what it is. And when you don't know what something is, the first thing you want to say is, "Who are you? What's your name?" It's so mysterious, and it changes you. And suddenly there's more space in you. And when you have more space, you understand what the word makom means. Makom is space. And I think that that's where the place of a bracha happens, because a bracha can't be given. The only way you can receive a bracha is if you make space in yourself, if you make makom. So I think at that point, Yaakov just made makom and realized his own blessing. So he could have gotten it. It didn't really matter, bless me. He was being blessed just by making the makom.
Very nice.
In himself.
So with any other burning thoughts, I want to make sure we have time to get to Havdalah on time. Joanna, yeah.
I'll just share a final thought that I wonder if just before verse 31, where Jacob names the place Peniel, because that suggests to me that in the same way that he previously named the place from the previous dream Bethel, that he did realize that it was God, and he knew it at that point. Like, if there's a beaten time between verses 30 and 31, meaning like up until that moment, he hadn't recognized it. But then in reflecting on everything that had just happened, he's like, oh, this must be kind of like what happened to me in that last dream. In fact, it was God. So now I'm going to call this place Peniel.
Very nice. Nice connection. So with that, I wish for all of us a week going forward of finding Hamakom God, of finding Hamakom space, of finding the places physically and inside us where even in struggle, we can partner with God to find and ask for the blessings that will keep leading us forward. So with that, back to Rabbi Schatz for our Mariv conclusion. And I will go tend to my little guy in the background.
Yasher koach. Very, very nice teaching. So we're going to be on page 264 or page 281 or page 200 for Mariv. Yeah, that we're gonna go through Mari very quickly, and then we'll do Havdalah. I was gonna tell you more, but that's it for now. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה להשיב אפו ולא ייקח, אמרת אדוני השם מלך יעננו ויום קוראנו. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו בכל העם אשר בברא מרי וערים בחוכמה ותשרים ובפינם אשר נהייתים מחליבס. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה אדוני צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים תמידים לחלנו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב ערבים אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל אל מלך נאמן שמע ישראל Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים אליכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת באמונה כל זאת קיים עלינו ומלכותו ורצון קיבלו עליהם משה בני ישראל לכהנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נראתי לוט אוסף אלה מלכותך ראו בניך בוקר יום לפני משה זה אלי אנו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כיפת אדוני תעקב וגלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום ועמדנו מקנו לכם ופסלנו סגור שלום ושמור צאתנו ואינו לחיים ושלום יתהווה עד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעד. We'll turn out to the whispered Amidah, which can be found on page 270 or 286 or page 210.
Sure. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל ועד עליו בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
Amen. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם לעולמי עלמיה.
יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם לעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
עושה שלום ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Well, Shavua Tov, we'll do a quick Havdalah. If you want to follow along in a Siddur, it's on page 283 or 299 or page 700. And if not, you can just sing along. Yanai, 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 Yeshuati, Eftach velo efchad, Ki ozi vezimratya, Adonai vayehi li Yeshua, Ushavtemai besason, Mimanei Yeshua, Ladonai Yeshua, Alamcha virchatecha sela, Adonai tzevaot, Imanu, Miskav lanu, Elohei Yaakov sela, Adonai tzevaot, Ashrei Adam boteach bach, Adonai Yoshia, Hamelech Ya'anenu ve'yom korenu, la Yehudim, Hayta ora, Vesimcha vesason veikar, Ken tiyeh lanu, kosi Yeshuot esa, uv'shem Adonai ekra, Yainanai, yananai, nai, Yainanai, yananai, nai. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei vesamim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei meorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, ben or lechoshech, ben Yisrael le'amim, ben yom hashvi'i le'sheshet yamei hamaseh. Baruch atah Adonai, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Chatoteinu imcho, Zareinu v'chaspenu, Yarbe yarbe kacho, V'chakochavim balayla. Zareinu v'chaspenu, Yarbe yarbe kacho, V'chakochavim balayla. Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. Eliyahu hanavi, Eliyahu hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu agiladi, bimera ve'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. Shavua Tov, everyone. Yasher Koach to Rachel again for a beautiful teaching, and I will see you soon, hopefully over the course of the week or maybe next Shabbat. But I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving and that you enjoy the rest of the week.